Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special breakout session from the Global Compact Network India at the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit. The theme of the session is Living in Harmony with Nature, Advancing Private Sector Engagement in the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework. As we all know that the world today is facing unprecedented and interconnected environmental challenges in areas including climate change and biodiversity. However, despite many positive actions by parties and stakeholders, most of the IT targets of the strategic plan for biodiversity last decade were not achieved. Keeping this in mind, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to be adopted at the Conference of Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity in October this year, is a historical movement. And the vision of this strategic plan is a world living in harmony with nature, where by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, and widely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and delivering benefits essential for all people. To accelerate the process, the United Nations Global Compact India Network is calling on corporate efforts to increase business stewardship of natural resources, implement innovative solutions, and contribute to sustainable development. Multi-stakeholder engagement and collective action will be critical to set and deliver ambitious targets and adopt responsible practices for a transition to a net zero resilient economy. It is then my personal privilege to moderate this exceptionally talented and diverse panel having representation from leading corporates in India, both from the public and private sector. So we have Mr. Ranjan Kumar Mohapatra, Director HR of the Indian Oil Corporation Limited, and Ms. Madhulika Sharma, Chief Corporate Sustainability from Tata Steel. Welcome, Ranjan and Madhulika. We also have with us Mr. Ashwini Saxena, CEO of the JSW Foundation. It is a social development arm of one of the leading steel conglomerates of India. And we have co-conspirators and co-implementers of biodiversity targets, Ms. Divya Sharma, Executive Director, Climate Group India, and Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, Director, VNV Advisory Services. Welcome. To begin this discussion, my first question will be addressed to both Ranjan and Madhulika as representatives of the corporate world in India. What do you think, how are businesses preparing their own biodiversity action plans in ways that are more compatible with biodiversity conservation and as part of the sustainability responsible agenda? And how can businesses ensure that biodiversity becomes topical within the whole organization instead of only being a strategic policy issue? Ranjan, Madhulika, whoever wishes to go first.
Thank you. Thank you, Shabnam. Thank you very much. Thanks for giving this opportunity also. It's a topic which needs to be discussed. So that's definitely there. And we have this elite panel. So I'm extremely thankful for that. So let me start with taking this cue that we all know that rich biodiversity of our planet is under a lot of threat. So that's why we are discussing this today. And the loss features in the top 5 risks by livelihood and impact in the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, which came out in 2021. So it's declining faster than it has at any point of time in the human history. I think that is something which is a concern for each one of us sitting here and each one of us who are there. I mean, almost between 10,000 to 100,000 species are going extinct each year. So this loss definitely poses serious risk for societies, for economies, and of course, health of the planet. Business, as you have pointed it out, you have posed it to us, business will have a huge role to play in the conservation efforts, in this effort. See, number one, every business has to first understand the impact that their business has or business activities has on the environment. As a responsible corporate citizen, and they got to remain committed to protecting biodiversity, and of course, not only within the regulatory requirements, they must have to go beyond regulatory requirements. So this is what I want to start with. At the same time, I'll just touch upon how we do it. So we do recognize that our business, we are in energy business, so it has impact on biodiversity definitely. So not only do we assess the impact of our operations as a part of, let's say, EIA studies for obtaining consent, establishing or operating and reporting on actions taken. But we also ensure that our projects are not in the vicinity of the protected areas. We also, as I was mentioning, we also would like to go beyond the regulatory requirements, and a lot of initiatives which has been taken. As you know, as everybody would know, that we all have 9 refineries, which is having a combined capacities of 70 million metric tons per annum. Scientifically designed eco parks have been put in place. I mean, these host a variety of local flora and fauna species. And I feel so happy. I mean, recently I visited the Mathura refinery, and we have this eco park. When you see 300 species of resident and migratory birds and 285 species of plants and trees which can be spotted in these parks, we again recognize. I mean, I think we don't have any ambiguity on that. That tree plantation or anything cannot be a solution to protecting biodiversity. I think we all recognize that. But at the same time, can we have a standardized policy on this, wherein care can be taken to ensure trees native to the place are planted, and as far as IOC is concerned, these plantations have act as pollution sinks, and cumulatively, Indian Oil has more than 24 lakh trees, observing approximately 48 TMT CO2e of carbon emissions. I think these are a few things, and of course, to protect the biodiversity and ecology outside boundary, we have this local forest. We align with the local forest department to support conservation efforts. We have something at Nal Sarovar Bat Sanctuary and all. But these are just starting. These are just on indicators. Okay, so we have to go. I mean, as an organization, as a business entity, I feel we have to go much beyond this as well. Coming to the second part of your question before we go to Madhulika, I think coming to how biodiversity can be topical, I have a lot of questions to ask on this actually. I mean, one thing is very sure, business and organizations need to introduce a holistic and integrated approach towards sustainability in their organization, wherein biodiversity will play an important role. And to make it topical, we have to have involvement of all stakeholders. I think this is something, a behavioral change among the different segments of stakeholders need to be aimed at. I think a parallel can be done from Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, where in India, it has been successful because everybody, all the stakeholders were involved in all segments. So my questions could be some ideas before we go to Madhulika. Can there be a central planning and monitoring department which should assess, establish baselines, plan and create plans? Can we create a company-wide biodiversity action plan highlighting the set of time-bound future actions? Can we have enough outreach programs by segmenting of stakeholders into different groups? Employees, it could be employee families, suppliers, distributors, contract workers, etc. Can we have that? Last but not the least, can we associate organizations like, let's say, GCRI to create a company-based awareness on biodiversity? Can we do that? These are all small pointers. I feel very strongly that responsible business can definitely go a long way to creating this topicality within the organization. Just not keep it on the statute. We can definitely go a long way to create this topicality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a great start, Ranjan. Madhulika, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think some of the point that I would have put has already been put by Mr. Ranjan, that why biodiversity is so very, important. I think next to climate change, it is the most existential issue for entire mankind. And I think this pandemic has only exaggerated the impacts that the negative impacts that human beings have created on the ecology, and which is bringing us much more closer to, and hence these the genes are, the virus are, leaping the species and coming back to us. So in a way, actually, nature is coming to us. So, and that is why probably it figures, and also apart from climate change, biodiversity has been figuring in the top 5 risks of World Economic Forum. And needless to say that just like, ONGC, probably Tata Steel, which we are a leading steel company in the country, and we create steel, and we use a lot of resources which comes through extractive mining, and hence we understood that and probably we started in a way our a holistic and a comprehensive biodiversity management probably a lot earlier than others. And because we were not very comfortable on the subject, we chose to actually collaborate with the leading organization, which is IUCN, way back in 2013, because that we also have our own iron ore mines and coal mines. And that is where we started understanding that biodiversity is actually beyond tree plantation, and it actually means that it's a very holistic subject. And that is where we IUCN helped us to understand this, and we came out with the first biodiversity policy by at least the steel companies in India in way back in 2016. So I think the initial years were in understanding the impacts that we create, and then socializing this subject, and then coming out with a biodiversity policy where the leadership is committed to aiming for a no net loss on biodiversity. Now, having said that, how then we decide, realize that we need to make it an integral part of our strategy and also cascade it along the whole of organization. And we are a large organization, multi-locational, etc. So again, we continued our collaboration with IUCN, and we have created biodiversity management plans for each location, because as mentioned earlier, each location will have its own nuances about the biodiversity. It will have its own native species, its own flora, fauna, which needs to be protected. And so we have covered all the raw material sites that we have, 8 in number in Odisha and Jharkhand. They have a very detailed biodiversity management plan, which are getting actioned upon. And we were also having them reviewed through IUCN, who are again an experts to understand the progress on the biodiversity management plan. In 2019, we understood that we now need to actually take it beyond our raw material sites and make it, as mentioned, that make it a kind of lingo for every person. So we have now created, to socialize and to actually provide an umbrella governance structure, we have created a center of excellence, which is chaired by a very senior person in our organization. And it has got a working team which has representation from all locations, including steel mines, including our downstreams, everything. And now we are working towards having each location having a biodiversity management plan. We have till now covered slightly more than 50% of all our sites, and we plan to, in next 3-4 years, cover all our sites having a biodiversity management plan. Still, I'll say it's just a beginning. And one of the, I think, shortcomings of biodiversity and why it has not probably gained so much of traction, especially in private sector, is because one, it is difficult subject to comprehend. It really needs, and there are far too little subject matter experts, I'll not say within the country, even globally. And we need far more subject matter experts on this. And one is the absence of, probably framework standards, which allows to be aligned align your actions. That the leadership asks me is that what you are doing is enough? So I don't have a bar to actually measure ourselves, but I think that's one of the things. And I'll also probably say that we probably need to create far more capability within the country on this subject, which is very, very important, I think, for all our existence. So I'll leave it at that, Shabnam, and probably come discuss about it later.
Great. I think we are moving in the right direction, because this is the kind of understanding that most corporates around the world have had. And that is why it's for the first time that the United Nations has picked up this agenda and specifically working on a biodiversity plan. So we'll go ahead with that. And with that leads to my next questions. And this time it is to Ashwini and Sandeep. Ashwini, you have a special role as being a part of the private sector, and still like a lot involved in different kind of stakeholder development, and realizing that private sector is in many ways responsible for the largest share of deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water and air pollution. How do you think they can contribute for the post-COVID economic, environmental, and human recovery, especially through collective action? Both Ashwini and Sandeep, you work with diverse stakeholders in different geographical regions within the country, so we'd like to get your separate perspectives.
So
Ashwini.
Shabnam, thank you for the provocation. The single most important source of groundwater as well as surface water pollution is untreated sewage. The global food systems contribute by 1/3 of the GHG emissions. India lost about 38,500 hectares of tropical forest to agriculture between 2019 and 2020, which means roughly about 14% of loss of its tree cover. And this is as per Global Forest Watch. So what I would suggest is that we must acknowledge that there are trade-offs and which need to be appreciated in the right spirit. And the private sector adheres to all the regulations and statutory compliances, and it's always subject to continuous audit and vigil. I think my colleagues from Indian Oil and Tata Steel would certainly adhere to that. And yet the private sector plays the role of also, fast-tracking wealth creation and contributing to the GDP of the country. So I think we need to realize that the loss of biodiversity is due to a complex combination of various market failures, policy inconsistencies, and a whole range of political and cultural and economic reasons. What private sector brings on to the table is, along with its professionalism and accountability, some of the pioneering conservation of efforts. Mr. Mohapatra touched upon them, Madhulika touched upon it, and I'll just give you just some key examples as to how these things can be looked at both by the private and the public sector in collaboration with the non-profit organizations. And I would also open it up to say that it should also involve the startups, the innovators, the young champions, entrepreneurs who are trying to get into this space. So for example, if we look at biodiversity as such, it's a very integrated, comprehensive matter, and therefore we as JSW Foundation have been handling water, waste, and sanitation all in an integrated fashion. And when it comes to locations where we also run ports in the coastal regions, mangrove restoration also gets synced into it. So it's a very comprehensive approach that we try to adhere to, and which obviously then requires a whole range of partners and expertise who continue to work closely with us on these issues. And when I'm saying this, I'm completely cognizant of the fact that post-COVID, there are going to be challenges, but these are some of the long-term programs that we are committed to as a corporate foundation, and we would continue to be working on that. And just giving glimpses as to how we need to keep a focus on, in some ways, the way we have tried it. So, for example, while there was a whole range of attention only on desilting of dams, we believe that mapping the entire watershed at a regional scale, planning the entire ridge to valley conservation plan, and sharing it with the NGOs, the government, and the other corporates to make this information available for convergence of their efforts. I think that's what we have been doing as a philosophy. And we didn't stop at that. We connected this watershed development work to smokeless cooking stoves, so that the health of the women and the environment locally can be protected. Now the NGO partner who's working with us is seeing how it can bring the women into more self-help activities, economic activities, so that their attention gets diverted towards more economic activities rather than gathering fuel wood, and therefore it automatically brings them down. Private sector brings in a lot of convergence between innovators and non-profits. I think that's one direction that we all need to look at. We are trying in a small little humble way to do a couple of lake rejuvenation programs where there's another corporate foundation working in collaboration with us. There's a whole range of startups who are going to be involved with us. The waste pickers are going to get involved with us, and the NGOs would all be working closely with us. For last several years, we've been working with ICRISAT on integrated watershed and agriculture projects to see how climate smart crops can be brought out. And from a biodiversity lens, let me say how those crops which were forgotten because of the onslaught of paddy and wheat traditionally, for example, millets, how they can be revived and they can be added to the food security of the people. So you conserve biodiversity and you also protect the health and nutrition of the people at the same time. A very interesting example that we have done recently is waste management is one program that we've run across entire 11 states where we are present, and in 18 odd locations there. multi-layered plastics, the MLPs as we call them, are the biggest menace. And I think we all know how they've been, polluting our water bodies, and because of which a whole range of biodiversity loss is automatically happening, which we are not even aware of. So what we've recently done is that, as a steel company, we've innovated our steel blast furnace feeding mechanism such a way that it can take shredded plastic inside, and it's co-processing at a very high temperature. So it takes care of all NOx emissions, which would otherwise be happening when the municipal waste fill is being burned. And the MLPs, which nobody wants to talk about, no plastic recycling is amenable to that. Those MLPs are now being utilized, and we are trying to scale it up to all our locations where a steel plant can actually consume this. So these are some of the ways in which I believe private sector has a big role to play, and obviously it would require a convergence of various partners, lot more research, lot more ideas need to be brought in. And so therefore, I think the paradigm should be shifted from responsibility per se, because you've done it, to responsibility where you are capable of contributing and therefore you should be responsible. So the whole spectrum of responsibility has to shift from just, a tick box to, like what Mr. Mohapatra mentioned, to a whole range of things that you can bring onto the table as a private sector entity and collaborate with both the public as well as the non-profit sector in a way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashwini. I think, Sandeep, what I'll do is taking a cue from the responsibility aspect of the corporates, why don't we jump in directly into the accountability aspect? And I think for that, I would like both Sandeep and Divya, especially to share with us of how can businesses be made responsible against the ecological footprint efficiently and effectively, and can a biodiversity loss mitigation action framework contribute to develop an elaborative framework for business sector specific mitigation plans? So mitigation and ecological footprint is what I would like Sandeep and Divya to come on. Sandeep, please.
Sure. I'll probably take the second part of your question first, Shabnam, because I do believe that is also tied in with what Ashwini just said about collective action. While accountability is there, but a framework, because I continually say that everywhere, that we need to look beyond our own boundaries and look at hotspots. And I mentioned this before in one of our conversations as well. I think as a country, we have certain hotspots, and that's where collective action can come up. And that's where your framework that you mentioned can come in. I do believe that there needs to be more private sector collaboration. I do believe, and that's with all due respect here, there is a bit of caginess in the work that is done by different corporates. While there is an openness in tying up with academic institutions and so on and so forth, but there is this is my project kind of a scenario, which I don't think can work in a biodiversity, and we're talking about conservation, we should also be talking about restoration. Today, desertification is a massive problem in India. We are, converting soil into dust in a lot of areas. We work in Bundelkhand, for example, Mewar, Marathwada, these regions, we have issues there. And this is not just about planting trees. So biodiversity is quite a big subject, which is where I think the framework question needs to be answered first. I do believe that, the Himalayan region, the Western Ghats, the Siang valleys, the Pakes, the Sundarbans, the Andamans, the Gulf of Mannar, these are places that need action. Why? Because, the Himalayas basically is what the Gangetic Plains depend on. And every industry has something or the other in the Gangetic Plains. So you can't run away from that fact. So that's where the framework part comes in, Shabnam. I would assume that is a paradigm shift Ashwini talked about. I really think we need to have a mind shift in terms of collective action, but on an action level, not just limiting to a study or anything of that sort. We really need action on the ground. And accountability, yes. I mean, I still believe there needs to be accountability. I still believe there has been extraction of resources. Whether that was a trade-off, yes or no, is a debatable subject, but I still believe that the responsibility does not only lie with the regulatory agencies, it does lie, because policies are policies at the end of the day. If we do not put some responsibility at the doorstep of the producer. I'll just give you an example. We are asked again and again to recycle. My question always is, why are you making things that I need to, that I can't recycle? So, that is something that I would like to, responsibility is not just pointing fingers, but it's also just, we need to be cognizant of what we have done. And biodiversity has a historic element to it. It's not that everything has happened over the last 10 years. Industry in India has been working for over the last 40 years, 50 years, and there has been, I would say, and that is backed by policy. There's nothing wrong with it. Everybody's done it the legal way. But has it been enough? And there has been, and all these diversity losses that we're talking about and the numbers we are throwing in, there is a reason for it. So I would say that, we need, number one, accountability. Yes, I am a firm believer in it. I'm not saying, a stick theory. There has to be, more understanding of it. It's a very nuanced subject. But yes, accountability and framework, like I said, hotspots. We need to really look at hotspots here. We can't be working, my factory is in Pune, so I will work around lakes only in Pune. Doesn't make sense to me as a large corporate. Of course, sizes of corporates matter and so on and so forth. So we would have to bring that shift a little bit in understanding. So yeah, Divya, sorry.
Thank you, Sandeep. And thank you, Shabnam, for this question. I think when we are talking about ecological footprints, we are talking about resource consumption. That is what we take from the biome and nature in general. But besides that, it is also about what we give back in terms of waste and polluting all three: water, air, and land. And the previous speakers have already talked about it, and it has definite negative impact on biodiversity. The area of influence for industries, for example, or even large infrastructure that are being built so rapidly in the last few decades is quite wide scale, sometimes really invisible. So you cannot track the damage. And then land use change for establishment, for operations. And because of the waste produced and dumped from industrial waste, for example. So understanding these impacts and adopting measures that can enhance resource efficiency are one way to go about it. Or should we say, just begin with? Besides this, the concepts of circularity, the concepts of sustainable consumption and production. And Sandeep put it in a very succinct way already. All these are ways and means to become efficient businesses. And they have to be intricately, interwoven in the strategies of business operations. And that is really required now. One great way to accelerate efficiency and impact of resource management plans is to influencing supply chain of businesses to adapt some of these biodiversity and resource efficiency based initiatives across the supply chain. And I would say the best way to link these principles would be to link them to business ethics and ethos, because ultimately this is what we stand for, right? And I can give you one example of one of our EP100 members, Mahindra's. So they've committed to being a carbon neutral group by 2040, and they've taken decisive steps towards the same on carbon, water, and waste management. Their sustainability philosophy has 3 P's into it. So people, planet, and profit. They are also a founder member of India Business Biodiversity Initiative and part of the team enabling a wide business group to adopt good biodiversity practices and reap its benefit for businesses. So what Sandeep was mentioning, that going beyond the cities that they belong, going beyond their own influence areas. And in terms of the biodiversity loss mitigation action framework that you were talking about, Shabnam, I think my response would be yes, because the elements of such framework should establish a baseline first, establish targets, of course, that are needed because we need to know where we are heading towards, and have clear measurable indicators specific to the business or the industry, and definitely a mitigation roadmap or an action plan to go with it. So I think these are 4 basic, pillars of a mitigation action framework, which should become part of the business strategy to go with. So that is how I think it can, perhaps go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep and Divya. I think we have spent a good part of the panel. The panel essentially is divided in 3 parts. In the first, we looked at what we are already doing and how we are doing it. In the second, we looked at what needs to be scaled up, how we are expanding. And the third and most important part, the last juncture, is for any good idea to work, what is required is resources. So without resources, most ideas would not actually be put into action. So taking the resource aspect in mind, especially for biodiversity conservation, my question is to the corporates. And this time it's Ranjan, Madhulika, and Ashwini. Why do you think, why is it important from both an ecological and economic perspective that private sector provision for biodiversity conservation and restoration, as Sandeep mentioned, for it to be efficient and effective? And how do you intend to do it within your own businesses? So special provisioning for biodiversity mitigation.
Yeah, so I'll start first, Shabnam, on this and try to be very brief. So I think we have established, I had made this point that probably one of the drawbacks that even, responsible corporate, there are no framework standards which sets a kind of accountability for them, and whatever they are doing is in their understanding a responsible thing to do. And I think having these frameworks are very, very essential for actually broad basing a lot of these initiatives. And having said that, there is, of course, a need for provisioning of resources. And as I said, that we have scaled up our activities beyond our raw material sites, which traditionally we said are where the biodiversity loss could be happening because of the extraction. And we are saying even are probably like Jamshedpur or Kalinganagar, where we have operating sites, even, where we have downstream operations, they are sites where we should look at what we can do there to manage, or beyond conservation, actually looking at some of the restoration opportunities which are there. And hence we are now, putting resources and also looking at creation of some, thematic at that location, what makes, and it was mentioned by Mr. Ranjan about creation of eco parks, etc. Looking at opportunities which could come by of creating a patch into a desert patch, into creating into probably a good green land, etc. So I think it's very important. It's a beginning, I'll say, and it needs to be scaled up. For us, we have tried to create a governance structure. We have tried to create a very top-down kind of an approach, so that the adequate resources can be provided, and also given the due importance which the subject needs. And we have tried to socialize it within the whole of organization by having working teams. We also have nature clubs at each of the locations, which also takes it beyond, the organization to actually employees and other stakeholders, so that, we can socialize the subject further and get ideas from outside in ideas also on how to work on this subject. We have now integrated it into our long-term plan. Biodiversity is a key aspect in our long-term strategy, which gels back with the whole, business strategy. And that is how we are trying to do it. And of course, resources are an important aspect. So I'll leave it at that, Shabnam.
Thank you, Madhulika. Ranjan?
Yeah, okay. I will just go slightly differently. I mean, let us understand one and appreciate one thing, that fundamentally any business entity, why does it exist? It exists to maximize returns to its stakeholders, right? So that remains paramount. And but the only thing is that the perspective of how we look at or how do we recognize our stakeholders, that has undergone a change. I think that has undergone a fundamental change. I think probably earlier stakeholders meant only the investors or the shareholders or others, whereas the definition has gone much beyond. And that brings back to us that we are not only talking about profits. I think Sandeep was talking about, and I think Divya was also talking about 3 Ps and all. Yes, we have gone much beyond that. So at this same point of time, I just loved the way Sandeep has put everything in perspective on the challenges, on the regulatory things, and on the things that we have to be together to take it forward. At this same point of time, one thing which bothers me is that valuation of ecological cost, that still remains a big challenge. I think that is what is making us difficult to calculate a return on a project. I think the private sector must be facing this issue. So the ecological perspective incorporated into commercial considerations during the project planning and conceptualization, that can only help us for future changes. What has been done in the last 50 years is gone. I mean, everybody has followed principle, everybody has followed regulation, but that was not enough. If we have to do enough, then this needs to be built in. Again, just on this subject, I don't want to sound very prescriptive on that. Please pardon me for that. But To make this biodiversity conservation efficient and effective, I think some fundamental changes need to be brought in. Number one, for me, I feel very strongly a single unambiguous framework to replace plurality of institutional and legal economical planning frameworks needs to be brought in, and which are often competitive and overlapping, thus hindering smooth implementation of programs, policies, projects. So this is one. Decision makers from various sectors and agencies should have access to appropriate scientific information and associated economic implications for analyzing trade-offs. And we can't talk about it again 10 years from today that what we did today was wrong, was not right. I think, and probably that's also important. And the third thing, which is also very important, which I feel, ecosystem mapping needs to be done to the last level, or the lowest level, to the district level, to the taluka level. That needs to be done, and it should be made available to the business so that impact assessment can be done, and not impact assessment only. I mean, I really take it from Sandeep. I loved it, the way he expressed. It's not only the area around your business. It has to be everywhere. It has to be, it has to be, you have to take care of the globe. You don't have to only take care of the place where you are doing your business. So this needs to be available. And last but not the least, economic incentives have to be given to the companies to develop business models based on sustainable use of natural resources. I think these are some of the, I did not want to sound prescriptive on this, but these are my points which needs to be. And of course, I know everybody all sitting here must be thinking on the same lines. We all feel sooner it is better. It is for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjan. Ashwini?
I think Madhulika and Ranjan have already captured a lot of things. I would just say, it all starts from right at the level of policy, even within an organization, even whether it's a public sector or a private sector institution. And from there, it needs to cascade down to the last, connect with the communities around or beyond that. The approach, could be very different for very different kinds of organizations. Some would like to, start from where they are and where they can influence in the best possible manner and then scale up. There are institutions who do not have that kind of a physical footprint, so they may like to, scale it up from a number of places at the same time. So we can never, generalize that one particular approach is better over the other. I think depending upon the context of an institution, I think that's where it comes from. But certainly, you cannot have a trade-off between the ecological and economic, perspectives or considerations of biodiversity. They are interconnected. And they are so interconnected that, right from the policy level, so the foundation or the corporate may have a biodiversity policy very well defined and articulated. How it translates into action, how it is a part and parcel of your business processes or your daily basis of functioning, I think that is what is important. So if you are working on plastic management outside your domain and you're still continuing to use half a liter or 200 ml plastic bottles for water usage in your office, then these are two very dichotomies that you can't be living with. So I think those are the kind of things that we as corporates certainly believe we need to demonstrate. And I think, as Mr. Mohapatra touched upon it, that a whole ecosystem, which I think Sandeep also talked about it, needs to be developed. It's a shared responsibility, and everybody can contribute to it, and everybody is willing to contribute it. Because I can tell you from our experience, when you are going back to your internal stakeholders and telling them about something exciting that you want to do, one example, where we work with Bombay Natural History Society for looking at one of the key endangered species of mangoes to how we can restore them. It had no business correlation with our work, but the excitement of doing something which nobody has ever tried, why not put an effort onto it? I think that excitement needs to be multiplied, amplified, and I think that would automatically start solving a number of problems. I'll stop at that.
Great, thanks, Ashwini. I think that feeds it directly very well to the next and the final question. To Divya and Sandeep. Divya and Sandeep, what role does sustained investment in global biodiversity monitoring and the development of measurable indicators, as Divya mentioned, play in tracking the effectiveness of biodiversity protection initiatives?
Who goes first? Shabnam.
So, Sandeep, you can go ahead.
I'll just Yes, I mean, also just on the solutioning side a little bit in terms of how this can be done. I mean, we basically, somebody talked about what is the business case for it. I mean, we work on a business case basically with the net zero targets of companies, and we've been able to fund almost 700,000 hectares of land use. I don't know, I mean, how many millions of trees put in the ground. This is all basically based on a business case that was made for corporates. And I believe that that's also a message that needs to go through in terms of trying to make that case for it, apart from obviously valuation part. And Shabnam, again, your question, please. Sorry, I probably digressed a little bit over there. Sorry.
No, so I was just essentially asking about how does sustained investment in global biodiversity monitoring and the development of measurable indicators play in tracking the effectiveness of the protection initiatives.
Yes, that ties in with what Mr. Ranjan was mentioning as well. I think on the valuation accounting part, and of course, better monitoring systems out there. I think the systems are there, Shabnam. I mean, there are global systems out there. Whether they are localized enough for the Indian scenario, yes and no. So that's something that needs some work. I think we have brilliant minds in our academic institutions. Like, for example, we work with the ICFREs and the ICARs and so on and so forth. Swaminathan Foundation. And so there is the need and the desire out there to get this done. I think, and this is probably the theme out of this entire thing, we need a common platform for all of this, right? Goes back to what I continually say about collective action. This is not something we can do on our own. This will need governments, this will need corporates, NGOs, and people. We forget people here in this entire discussion. Biodiversity is not just about human-animal conflict. We have human-to-human conflict as well. If you look at our biodiversity areas, these are things that we need to keep in mind and keep them as indicators for exactly what you mentioned. As monitoring parameters, monitoring here is not just about flora, fauna, and wildlife. It's also about what it does to the ecosystem as a whole. And ecosystems, again, we've forgotten ocean ecosystems in this entire discussion. There is this entire ecosystem, seagrasses that we need to worry about. These are things that will affect us. So the monitoring parameters need to be widespread, and it's a vast subject. So it would mean that we put in various frameworks, but make it a common platform where everybody can access it. And I'm so happy that people on this panel have brought it up, because I'm always frustrated with the caginess that is displayed sometimes, but this is good. I think there is a point to be made here of moving ahead, making these frameworks, the monitoring parameters, the valuations, all of that. And that's how you make sustained investment possible, because if everybody is result-based, these are businesses at the end of the day. They're not donors and grant makers. So we need to have proper parameters out there. This is result-based financing. If you do not know how to measure the results, finance is not going to come in. That's how I would look at it. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, Sandeep, I would like to just touch upon one very important element that you briefly mentioned. I think the role of the communities. I mean, if we look at our country, the biggest saviors, or I would say conservationists of our biodiversity, have been the communities. The traditional knowledge that we have lost. And I think that's another element which requires a whole lot of research and documentation, and research requires basic respect. I think one of the key reasons why biodiversity has been lost in our country is because we kind of simply discarded the traditional knowledge without having, because unfortunately they were passed on as a matter of faith, as a connect with the spirituality, or as a connect with whatever other considerations that they may have. It was not documented. And since it was not documented, we've kind of discarded it. So whole traditional knowledge base has been lost from a biodiversity lens. We do not know how to converge again. The new challenges that we brought in because of our lifestyles have again created that challenge. They further complicated the situation. And it's a complex issue. You're talking about land is a state subject. You're talking about water, it has got a number of ministries involved. You're talking about marine ecosystems, there's a much larger number of stakeholders involved. So the complexity of biodiversity, and it's a very subtle subject, I think, as you pointed upon in the beginning. Planting trees, cleaning beaches is all fine, but biodiversity, it requires much more intrinsic, like what Mr. Mohapatra said, deep level understanding as to what biodiversity is all about. Sorry, I just intervened.
No. So Divya, do you remember the question, or do I need to repeat it?
No, I remember, Shabnam, and I'll be brief. So see, what Ashwini ji was saying was correct. I agree. biodiversity loss is difficult to make up for. It's difficult to recreate the delicate balance that can restore lost biodiversity. So definitely, yes, we need concerted investment. We need a common framework, as Sandeep was also pointing out, to go about this. This is the way to go about it, and monitoring becomes a very important part of this entire exercise. I've worked with many cities over the span of my decades of career, and some of the cities also are investing in city level biodiversity plan, for example. And one of the areas or sector looked at by the Climate Smart Cities initiative of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and National Institute of Urban Affairs also covers biodiversity monitoring and conservation. Now, it is an extensive indicator-based system that the city government could use to assess baseline and their progress against the baseline. And perhaps corporate could tie up with cities and their biodiversity conservation plans to begin with. But as I say this, I also agree with previous speakers that there has to be some commonality. All of these stakeholders need to come together at some place, because these are all dispersed initiatives at the moment. So that common framework and common indicators are really very important at this moment. And one last point that I want to make is that sometimes very simple solutions can go a long way. We have to be innovative in tracking and monitoring the change, as well as effectiveness of the biodiversity initiatives that already exist, and kind of try to find some way to bind together some of these impacts. And I think one quick example that I would like to give is our EP100 member Godrej and Boyens. They have launched a mobile app, for example, on mangroves, making it a first across India and Asia. This app covers 24 mangroves and associated species found in Maharashtra, and 16 species found in the Vikhroli one, which is one of the privately owned mangrove area, and quite an important biodiversity hotspot. So simple techniques such as these can go a long way, I guess. So that is
Thank
how
you.
I would
Yeah.
like to respond to it.
Thank you so much. I think we have run out of time. The common point that resonated was the need of a platform and the need of coming together. So in closing, I just want to share that, while covering all the issue areas and challenges and opportunities of the topic, we are happy to share that the United Nations Global Compact has launched the Climate Ambition Accelerator Initiative. It's a 6-month accelerator program for companies to set targets and to create a clear path for them. And additionally, the Global Compact Network India has launched the Climate and Biodiversity Workstream, which will further take this discussion forward, both in research and action, so that corporate engagement can be advanced, especially in the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We welcome each and everyone to engage and explore the workstream with us. Thank you so much for being such great panelists. Bye-bye.
Thank you for
Shabnam.
having us
Thank you,
here.
everyone.
Thanks, Shabnam.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.